Good morning, everyone. I hope all of you can hear me. So this is a webinar organized by Cochrane South Africa on Covidence. Covidence is a digital platform that aims to streamline the efficiency of review production and supporting teamworks working on reviews. Covidence is not a freely available software, but if you are an author of a Cochrane review, you can have access to Covidence using your RG login. Who's going to be guiding us through the workshop today, through the webinar, is Annelies Arno, who's the community manager for Covidence. I just want to let everyone know that we are recording the session and we will be able to share the presentation afterwards. I would also like to ask everyone to mute themselves while Annelies is speaking. And there will be moments when you can ask questions, either speaking or you can write a message in a chat box. So I will hand over to Annelies. Please do let me know if you can't hear anything. Over to you, Annelies.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. As she said, I am a community manager with Covidence. So that means that in addition to providing these training sessions, I also sort of act as the go-between between our user community and the product development process. So I am actually a researcher myself. I'm in public health research, and I come at Covidence really through that lens. So sometimes I find that's helpful for people to know before I start the presentation. As well, that I'm not a coder in any means, so if there is something about the product you don't like, please feel free to tell me, because I certainly won't take any offense to it, and it's actually really helpful for me to be able to provide that feedback back to the development process. So the way that the walkthrough will work is that I'll have sort of different almost chapters of the tool that I'll go through. I'll pause at the end of each one of those and ask if there are any questions. That is the best time to ask a question about that section. At the end, we will open it up to general questions as well as provide some information on support. You'll probably hear me say this several times, that we are quite keen. All of the support comes through the Covidence team to sort of take some of that burden off of the working groups and streamline the entire support process as well. So I'm often the person on the other end of support, if that's also helpful to know. I find people like to have a name and a voice, if not a face, at the other end of emails. So, and if you mention that you've attended this webinar, I'll try to remember you and, have some additional context and provide the best support as possible. So I have my screen sharing paused right now, so I'm going to resume it, and then we'll get going. So now you should be seeing my Covidence sign-in page. So you'll see that there's two options. I can log in with an email and a password, and then there's also sign in with Cochrane. If you are using Covidence for a registered Cochrane review, you will have to sign in with Cochrane, and that will allow you to link it back to RG and avail of Covidence for free. So I've now logged in, and what I'm seeing now is what we call my Covidence homepage. So this has a list of every review that I have going on right now. Each one of these is a title of a review, and each review is separate. So it's a separate sort strategy, a separate set of citations, team members attached to it, as well as data extraction forms. You also see that I am a member of a few organizations and have some of these through that. So one thing that we are looking at doing quite soon is having organizational accounts like these for each of the Cochrane review groups. So it is possible that if you are using Covidence for a registered Cochrane review in the near future, you'll see, in addition to my reviews at the top, you'll see, Cochrane Eyes and Vision Group, and then some reviews there, just as an example. So the review that we're going to use today is called Covidence Workshops. So I'll click into that, and then I'll be brought to my review dashboard. This gives me an overall snapshot of how far along in the review I am. You'll see that Covidence reviews are streamlined to 3 phases. So that's title and abstract screening, full text screening, and extraction. Those are set up and ready to go as soon as you open the review. And there's no adding to those stages or deleting from them. Those are the 3 stages of review in Covidence. I'll have this progress bar on the left side, and that's a separate progress bar for each of my 3 stages. The dark green indicates references that have received both of their votes and have been moved forward. The light green are references that are awaiting a second vote but have already been voted on by one reviewer. And the purple are references that are in conflict. So when you're voting in Covidence, all of your voting is automatically blinded and also automatically tabulated, you might call it. So it will move forward references automatically as soon as they have 2 votes which are in agreement. It will also automatically flag up any references which have conflicting votes. So before you do any of that, you'll want to import some citations. So the next thing I'll go through is the Import Studies tool. But before I do that, are there any questions on the review homepage or the review the Covidence homepage or the review dashboard? Okay, looks like we're good. So I've now come to the Import Studies tool. The first page I'll see is Import from File, and I have an option to import my citations into any one of these 5 lists. Most of the time you'll be going into screening, as that's the first part of the review. But let's say you've done some screening outside of Covidence and you want to put those references forward automatically, you could choose a different stage. So once I've selected which stage I want the references to go into, I would choose a file kept locally on my computer. And that can be an EndNote XML, a PubMed XML, an RIS file, or a text file with RIS formatting. I find that covers the vast majority of databases. As soon as I were to click import, I would actually be redirected to the stage that I've selected. So I'm actually going to first go through the Manage Imports page. This gives a list of all of the previous imports that I've completed, how many references were in them, if any duplicates were detected, and if there were any errors. You'll notice some of these imports have the option to undo, whereas others do not. Or some of them have already been undone. If you have started to sort the references associated with an import, that import can't be undone. So it's just something to keep in mind if you're maybe playing around before you get started. There is a bulk PDF import tool. I won't go through it in detail just in the interest of time right now, but essentially this works by reading the information kept in an EndNote XML about what the title of the PDF associated with a particular reference is. And then when those PDFs come in, Covidence knows where to match them. And that tool is available on registered Cochrane reviews and also on subscription reviews, but it won't be available on any trial reviews, just to keep that in mind. So are there any questions about the Import Studies tool?
Annalisa, it's Anel here. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, how are you?
Hi, good, thanks. Then I have a question about the import PDFs. Does it have to go via EndNote or can you import any PDF?
It needs to, the way that the tool works is it's sort of a two-step process where you import an EndNote XML and then import the PDF. So it's okay if you don't use EndNote, but the reference manager that you do use needs to use EndNote XML formatting. So I believe Zotero is able to export in that format, and I believe Mendeley as well.
Okay. Okay. So files that you can't get to go into EndNote, you can't just PDF it and then get it into Covidence.
There is a way to import the PDFs one by one, as we'll see see later on, but for the bulk PDF import tool, it has to be an EndNote XML. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions about the import tool? Okay, great. So I'll now come back to my review dashboard by clicking this arrow. You'll notice that anytime I'm going between parts of the tool, I'll come back to the dashboard before I go back out to a different part. So next I'll go through title and abstract screening. So I can actually click on any of these numbers and be brought directly to the corresponding list. I tend to click on continue just because it's what makes sense from my mind. But essentially if I click continue or here, I will be brought to screening. If I click on this link here, I'll be brought to my relevant list, and if I click on this one, I'll be brought to the conflicts. So I'll go into screening. You'll see that I have 3 different voting options, yes, no, and maybe. And again, those are automatically blinded. And as I vote, each reference is sort of removed from my task list and either move forward or move to the awaiting other reviewer page. A couple of useful tools at the title and abstract stage. Firstly is the highlighting keywords. So these are inclusion and exclusion keywords, which can show up in green and in red respectively. I'll show you how to program this in a bit, but it's just something to speed up screening a little bit. You can see that they stand out very well. It's also what I think of as sort of a reference guide for your protocol. So if I click Show Criteria, I can have some inclusion and exclusion criteria to remind me of what I'm looking for and what was listed out in my review protocol. At this point, they're not attached to any decisions. They are just there for reference. There's also the tagging option. You'll see that it's not open right now because I don't have any references selected. But if I select a few at random here, I now have the option of tagging them, and this is a customizable list of tags. So each one of these tags is something that I have added, and for various reasons they might be helpful to just put a note on that reference and then be able to quickly find that reference later. So if I want to say maybe this reference has some references that I think would be helpful to go through to find more references for my own review, and click it with Snowball. And each of those references now has that tag. And I can filter by that tag as well. So if I click Filter, and then select the tag of interest and click Filter again, it will tell me how many studies have that tag, and it will also selectively show me only those, in this case 4 studies. And those tags also export to Excel. So they're a really handy way to keep track of references sometimes. Other things to know at title and abstract stage, under the Resolve Conflict screen, you'll see who voted and who had the conflict, but you won't see how they voted if you're a third party. If you are one of the 2 original voters, you can vote by clicking View History. So my vote is here. But you can see that I can't see the other person's vote. And you could then either discuss that, or a editor or somebody senior could decide on a final decision of whether to move that forward to full text review or not. Under the awaiting of the reviewer screen, I'll see my previous votes. So of course, every reviewer who logs into this screen will see a completely different list because it's only your previous votes that haven't received a second vote yet. So as soon as they receive that second vote, they are moved forward. And if I want to change my vote, I can do that from the screen by clicking one of the other voting options. Okay, are there any questions about title and abstract screening?
Annalisa, so now here again. If you are if you are screening titles and abstracts and you press, say, for example, no, and then just as it goes away at the last minute, you see, oh, there is actually something in the abstract that might make it relevant, potentially. And now I want to go back to that one to revote that. I know it goes under awaiting under reviewer category, but if you haven't kept track of who was the author and what was the exact title of that abstract, is there any way that you can go and find the one that you did last?
The easiest way to do that, you're absolutely correct that it would go to the awaiting of the reviewer page, assuming that it hasn't already received its first vote, and you could sort by most recent. So that would show you the last thing that you voted on.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Of course.
Sorry, sorry, Anel, go on.
No, sorry. I just have one small question. If you want to tag something, and you click on that block at the left-hand side to highlight the specific article, and then you click on the tags, and then you type something new in, and you have made a spelling error, for example, and afterwards you want to go and correct it. Can you do that, or can't you do it under at the tags? Must you just leave it like it is and write over the correct one?
So the question is basically whether you can edit the list of tags?
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately at the moment that tagging list is not editable, so definitely be careful as you're adding those tags. But that is something that we're hoping to change.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, so if you are the second voter, and at the last minute you click the wrong button by mistake, can you find your way, I mean, that won't move to waiting another reviewer, it will move somewhere else. Is there a way to find that paper?
Yeah, that would get maybe slightly complicated, and that depends on what the first vote was, right? So it would move forward according to what the first vote was and how that combines with your vote. So if that vote is in conflict, it would go into resolve conflicts. If you had both voted no, it would go into irrelevant, and if you had both voted yes or maybe, it would move into full text review. So you could use that same strategy to, sort the list by most recent, and you'll see the thing that has most recently moved, but at that point it is automatically moved forward according to those votes. So you would need to find which list it had been sorted to and undo the votes from there.
Okay, thanks.
Of course.
If for example, me and Solange are doing our duplicate screening, and I choose yes and she chooses maybe, would it go under in to the full text stage, or would it go under resolving conflicts?
Yes and maybe votes are essentially calculated the same way. So maybe was added to sort of streamline or speed up screening, really. But yes and maybe don't count as a conflict with each other.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, are there any additional questions on title and abstract screening?
It seems we lost Annalise. Annalise, can you hear me? Okay, she's going to try to re-enter the meeting. Let's just wait. So she logged out and she'll log back in. Oh, there she is.
There it goes. I guess it reconnected. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Brilliant. Okay, so picking up where we left off, I'm going to go through these settings from right to left actually. So the first I'll go through is criteria and exclusion reasons. So we see first where we can make edits to that reference guide to the protocol. Next we see the first of two places that I can edit my exclusion reasons that will be used at full text review. And finally we have where I manage my keywords for highlighting. So those are the inclusion and exclusion keywords that show up in green and in red. Next up is team settings. So I'll see a slightly more detailed breakdown of that team progress bar, indicating who has contributed how many votes. So it's really helpful if you know that you want to split the work in a certain manner among your team, so you can track that here. By default, when you open a review in Covidence, it will be that everyone can do anything, but if you open up the Manage Rules, you can indicate that there's sort of a minimum screening. If you have maybe some senior reviewers who you know that every reference needs to receive at least one vote from one of them, you can add them to this list. And you can also indicate who's authorized to resolve conflicts. And those settings are separate for title and abstract screening, for full text screening, and again for extraction. Next up is add and remove reviewers, fairly straightforward page. You'll see something very similar to this when you first open your review, and it's just to send invitations to invite people to collaborate on their review. And finally, we have review settings where you can edit the title, indicate when your last search was, and I think most importantly are these two down here, which we refer to as dual reviewer mode and single reviewer mode. By default, again, everything will always be in dual reviewer mode when you first open it, but you can switch to single screening by clicking 1 here. If you do that after you've completed some screening in dual reviewer mode, anything which already has one vote will be moved forward, so that's just something to be aware of. So are there any questions on review settings? Okay, looks like we're doing well. So the next one we'll go through is full text review, and this is largely a repeat of title and abstract screening with a couple of important differences. Firstly, I now only have 2 voting options, and that's because, of course, this needs to be a final include or exclude vote. Second important difference is that when I vote to exclude now, I have to provide a reason for that vote. And of course, this being full text review, the last important difference is that you can add a PDF to each of your files. So I'll choose a file from my computer here. And of course, I'm just choosing a completely random PDF. I could then upload that, and once it's uploaded, it's available to everybody on the review. So only one person needs to do that uploading. You can see that now that file is listed here. So apart from those sort of 3 items, everything else is quite similar at the full text review stage to title and abstract. So I still have this highlighting keywords, I still have that protocol reference guide, and I still have my tags. So are there any questions about full text review?
Hi, Annalise. This is Solange. So at some point, in some cases, even after full text screening, you may still be uncertain about whether the study is in or out, or you may still be not sure about a specific process, and you need to contact the authors. So what is the best way of dealing with this? Because you're not 100% sure yet whether it's in or out.
How I would handle that is to simply not vote on it and add a note that indicates, we've contacted the authors for supplemental information, and when you add that note, your co-review authors will be able to see that. So instead of saying add a note, it will say view note. Notes here. No, I don't. So that would be an easy way to indicate to them that we're waiting for more information, and then to simply wait and not vote on it. That's how I would handle it.
Okay, thanks.
Are there other questions about full text review? Okay, sounds good. So again, I will come back to my review dashboard, and now I'll go into extraction. And I'm actually going to skip straight ahead to some that are already extracted so you can see what a more complete form looks like. So in Covidence, extraction includes both quality assessment, aka risk of bias, and data extraction. And at this point, you are required to have 2 people independently complete their forms, followed by a consensus form. So there is no single reviewer mode when it comes to extraction. You'll also notice that this first reference here, Cardini 1998, has been marked as the review template. That means that any customizable tables or domains that were set up on these forms will be automatically applied to newly opened extractions. Now, the template process is not as ideal as we would like it to be, so hopefully I'll explain it well, but again, it's not as intuitive as we typically hold ourselves to. So we're looking to improve that in the future. But essentially, as I said, it's only newly opened forms which receive that template. So if I made changes to this review template now, those changes would not apply to this study's forms because this study has already been opened and it has already received its version of the template. However, if there were a study here that had no names under either first reviewer or second reviewer and it just said start across it, i.e. that review hadn't, or excuse me, that study hadn't been opened yet, that would receive the most up-to-date version of the template. So hopefully that made some sense. As I said, we're looking to improve it. So first I'll go into the quality assessment stage and I'll go to my individual form. So you can see the domains that I have set up at the side as well as the PDF that I had previously uploaded. You'll also see that the PDF is pretty marked up. So these are all annotations that I've used, to support my risk of bias judgments. So you can see that if I highlight just some totally random text here, and I'll select a domain that I want that associated with, and I'll click Save. That text now copies over to my review or my risk of bias judgment. You can see that I have quite a few other annotations here already. I can have some additional comments on that judgment, whether it's explanation or just notes for myself, and I'll click Save. and that would save my review judgment. So you can also see that those judgments are streamlined to high, low, and unclear. And also this one that has a high +1, what that means is actually that there are multiple judgments in that domain because that particular domain is in outcome level risk of bias judgment. So once I have gone through my form independently and clicked complete, and my co-review author has done the same, we would be brought to a consensus form to complete, which would look something like this. In the middle, I'll have reviewer number 1. In the right, I'll have reviewer number 2, and on the left, I will have my consensus judgments. So I've already filled in this particular consensus judgment, but I'll delete these annotations so we can see how this would normally work. So I now have this blank judgment, and I would select which annotations, if any, I want to include in my consensus judgment. So if I want maybe this one from reviewer number 1 and this one from reviewer number 2, and I also want the comments, I would just click on each of those and you can see that they copied right over. And I'll click save, and I now have my consensus judgment for sequence generation. So I'll go through each one of the domains and complete that same process until I have my completed consensus form. And it is that completed consensus form which is able to export to RevMail. So that's another one that you'll hear me say multiple times, is that only the consensus form exports to RevMail. Very important to know. So are there any questions about quality assessment?
Annalisa, can you add domains here, for example, if you also include cohort studies?
Yeah, so this risk of bias form is customizable. You'll see when you first log into the quality assessment form, you'll be given the option of a Cochrane risk of bias template or a customized template. In either case, you can continue to customize that as you would like. So I have these 7 standard domains of the Cochrane risk of bias form, but I can also add to those by having a new domain here. And add a description of that domain, decide whether it applies to individual outcomes, and click save. And I now have a new domain in that template.
And so, for example, I have now 5 RCTs and 5 cohort studies that are included. Do I set up the first template, whether it's a RCT or cohort study, when I do the customized template for the data extraction form? Do I now add all the domains for the cohort and the RCT, even though the study that I'm doing the template with isn't the other study design, so that format gets taken over to all other studies?
Yeah, there's sort of, especially if you know ahead of time which ones are going to need which form, there is sort of a tricky workaround to get around how the template is applied, which I can follow up with you afterwards about, just because it's a very involved step-by-step thing, which also just makes more sense when written down. But technically speaking, you're only going to have ever one risk of bias template per review, but you are able to edit that template on a study-by-study basis.
Okay, so in the template, I can have all the domains that are relevant for RCTs and cohort studies, and when it comes to filling in, say, for RCT, then I can just delete the domains for that specific study that relates to the cohort studies.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think it depends how many included studies you end up with, but that would definitely be one excellent option of how to handle that workflow.
Okay, and so for example, I just leave the ones that are not relevant blank. How would that work with the comparison and import or exporting into RevMan?
I wouldn't do that simply because even if you leave them blank, they're still there in the consensus form, and what you'll end up with is a lot of blank rows in your RevMan file, which you'll then have to delete. And if my experience with RevMan tells me anything, is that that would just be incredibly tedious. So I personally would make sure to delete them in Covidence and only have the domains which are going to have a judgment.
Okay. Now, what if when you, because I've been setting up with a colleague the data extraction template for a study, right? And then we've by accident add 2 domains that actually should have been under another section of the data extraction form. So say we've put 2 sections under methods that should actually be under participants, for example. Now we want to delete those 2 sections under the participants, but we could not find a way to edit it or to delete that specific sections that we don't want anymore.
Right. Okay. So we're actually talking about the data extraction part of the form now, and we're going to go through that next. But the quick answer to your question is that right now the customized fields can't be deleted, and that is something that we're hoping to change in the future.
Okay, great. Thanks.
I think I had seen that somebody else had unmuted, which I assumed meant they were going to ask a question, but perhaps we ended up answering it. So I'll just ask if there's any other questions about quality assessment. Okay, great. So I will come over to data extraction now. So again, it's that same workflow of reviewer 1 and reviewer 2 need to independently complete their forms, and once they have indicated that those are complete, they will complete a consensus form, and it is the consensus form which is able to export to Excel and to RevNam. So first up in my data extraction form, I'll see a summary view. This isn't a form in and of itself, it's just a snapshot showing you what you've done so far. I apologize, my office is right next to a train station, so you might hear a train in the background there. There are 5 sections of this form: identification, methods, population, interventions, and outcomes. So under identification, these are largely fill in the blank, largely standardized. This is all set up for you when you enter the form. So there's nothing to set up here. And you can see, I think Anna was asking about the customized field. So this is what we're talking about. There is this customized field option, and that shows up as a text box with a customized label. In this case, I wanted to collect information about the year the study was conducted rather than when it was published, so I've added a text box for that. I can add another one if I want. Under identification, under methods, and under population, I have that option. Definitely, it's excellent that that's been brought up, that just a heads up, it isn't currently possible to delete those custom fields. This is something that the Covidence team has talked a lot about, and the 2 community managers have been really, really pushing to get changed. So hopefully that will be soon. Under methods, we have a drop-down list of some typical study designs you would see, and of course it's not an exhaustive list. So we'd see an other option which opens up this text box where you can collect customized information. Again, I have an option to add a custom field. Next up is population. So the standard text boxes that are in this section are my inclusion and exclusion criteria, as well as pretreatment group differences. An option for a customized field, and this is where I get my first customizable table. So I see that I have a column for each one of the study arms that I've added, as well as an overall column. And I have a row for each one of the characteristics that I want to collect about this population. So this is my own fault for setting this up in a perhaps somewhat misleading way. It does appear to be quantitative, but any sort of data can be kept in here, so it doesn't have to be quantitative data at all. Under interventions, I can add my study arms. You can see that Covidence does support multi-arms. And here I have my next customizable table. Again, I have a column for each one of my study arms, and again a row for each one of the descriptors that I want to collect about my interventions. And finally, we have outcomes. So you have sort of three options when it comes to collecting information about outcomes. The first two so you can collect them as a dichotomous outcome or as a continuous outcome or as a customized effective measure. So you see an example of the dichotomous outcome at the top here. There is some flexibility that can be collected as a percentage instead of as a number of events. We're very much hoping to add ratios very, very soon. The next example is a continuous outcome, which can be collected with confidence intervals, as it was here, with standard deviation or with standard error. And the benefit to those standard effect measures is that when you do export it to RevMan, it will populate your comparison tables for you. So definitely encourage that if you are using RevMan. You can see that some of these boxes are grayed out. That means that I've added a missing data tag. So I can remove that tag as well. Add it back in. And at the bottom, I have a customized effect measure that I've set up. So that's a fully customizable table where I've decided which columns I want. I'll always have a row for each one of my study arms. And in this case, I've decided that I wanted to collect this information as free text. But I can also collect it as an integer, a decimal, or as a percentage. So as with quality assessment, when both reviewers have independently completed their form and click complete, they'll be brought to a comparison view, which again will have reviewer 1 in the middle and reviewer 2 on the right, and the consensus on the left. So they will go through that form and decide which decision they wanted. You know, if perhaps 6 obstetric departments is just a little too much information and we just want to say hospital, I would click on that and it's now switched to hospital. So I'll go through each section of the form and fill in the consensus form. And there's just one thing here I want to highlight. So hopefully most of your outcome tables will end up looking something like this, where the two reviewers have precisely agreed on everything except for a couple of things. So you can see that they just disagreed on this one cell, and so that has been highlighted saying a decision is needed here. But otherwise, all of these have been automatically carried over to the consensus form because the two reviewers did precisely agree. And once that consensus form is complete, that is ready for export. So are there any questions about the data extraction form?
Hi, Annalise. This is Solange. Can you also export to an Excel format?
Yes, you can. Yeah, and we'll see how to do that in just a minute.
Lisa, I've got a question about the outcomes category. If you have a cohort study and they don't give you now results or data per exposure and non-exposed group, but they give you an overall risk ratio and a confidence interval, for example, how would you go and add that as an outcome?
So at the moment, what I would do for that is to set up a customized effect measure for it. And you will still, of course, get a row for each one of your study arms. But what I would do is to indicate in the title of the outcome, you know, what is being compared, you know, essentially what's your denominator, right? And then to label it as an odds ratio. You know, I would set it up so that my first column is an odds ratio, my next two columns are the confidence intervals, and then my last column is the sample size, and then have the title be something like, you know, odds ratio of exposed group as compared to control.
Okay, and how would that get exported to RevMan, for example, or can you not export the data for a customized?
Yeah, so unfortunately, that wouldn't be exportable to RevMan at the moment, and we are hoping to add ratios near future.
But the advantage of having it still here in Covidence is you can compare it in one screen with what the other person extracted for that specific study and that outcome, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
These are all really good questions. Is there anything else about data extraction? I know data extraction always has the most questions because it tends to be just the most diverse aspect of any review, really.
Annalisa, sorry, I'm asking many questions. I was also wondering, in terms of the data extraction template, so I now know when you set it up and you have, say for example, I set the template up with study A, and then I extract study B and C, but when I get to study D, I want to add another column or whatever, a section, right, for more information. I know for all the subsequent studies that I do, say E, F, G, whatever, the new column that I've added will come up for those studies, but just not for the ones that A, B, C that have been already extracted, right? But can you now go in study A, in study B, and study C manually and go add that column so it also displays for that study so you can add the details?
Yes, you can do that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, and would either of the reviewers that are doing the data extraction be able to add the column? So, or is it just one person, or it depends on how you set it?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, excellent question. So I'll actually come back to the included studies list. It is only the first reviewer who can edit those forms. So of course you want, it would sort of defeat the point, right? If reviewer 1 and reviewer 2 were working on 2 different forms. So it is only the person who's assigned as reviewer number 1 who can edit that. So you can see here I'm reviewer number 1. Let me find one where I'm reviewer number 2. There we go. So on this one, Julian was reviewer number 1 and I am reviewer number 2. So you can see that I actually can't add any outcomes. I don't have that option.
I think your screen is not showing. Is everyone seeing Annalisa's screen?
Sorry. I had paused it. I'm so sorry. So I'll go back. And so I now have my included studies list. So you see, first reviewer and second reviewer, and I've just scrolled down to find one where I am the second reviewer. So you can see, I apologize I had paused it and just totally forgotten. So Julian was reviewer number 1 here, and I am reviewer number 2. And when I come into data extraction, I'm unable to add any new outcomes. And it says to please contact the primary reviewer.
Okay.
And same for intervention, same for essentially everything. I can't add to the characteristics table. I can't add to the intervention table.
So on that note, I just want to clarify. So if person number A set up the template with the first study, right? But in another study, say study C, Solange was the first one who filled in the data extraction for that study, then only she can now go and change for that and edit for that specific study, even though person A did the main template for the data extraction with another study.
Yeah, so on a study-by-study basis, it's always whoever is in that first reviewer slot. You can always change that by clicking Manage Reviewers and switching who is assigned as the first reviewer. But it's really just, yeah, you can do that per study, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are there additional questions on data extraction?
Would you be able to show us how you actually export it to RevMan, how it looks?
Yeah, So that's the next step. So we'll do that in a minute. But any other questions about the extraction forms? Okay, perfect. So I've now come back to my review dashboard, and I'll come up to export studies. And the first page I'll see is my references and data export. So that's either if you're exporting one of your reference lists, or as well if you wanted to export to Excel rather than to RevMan. I would select included from that list and say I wanted my data, and then click export, and it will prepare a file down here for me to download. Next up is the export to RevMan. So I'll come into that page. I would select which comparison tables I want to include. Probably most often it will be all of them. I'd select a RevMan file locally from my computer, so it does have to be on your computer, at least on your server that you have access to through your computer. Covidence takes that file, it populates it with your extracted data, and then gives it back to you. And the items that will export are your included studies, your excluded studies with their reason, all of your risk of bias tables, and all of your extracted data. And finally, there is a formatted prism diagram for export, which is available either as a screenshot from here, or you can export the text data by clicking export data, and it's available here for you. And that is sort of the tool from start to finish. So perhaps while people are thinking of additional questions, I will go through how to access some support information. So you'll have seen that at any point in the tool, there's this question mark at the side. If I click on that, it will give me the option of going to the knowledge base or sending in an email to support. The knowledge base is really, really helpful. It's organized very similarly to how the walkthrough was organized today, with also some additional frequently asked questions. A lot of these articles have short format videos, so it's a really helpful way to just see something in action if you want to know how it's laid out. There's also a section for Cochrane authors at the bottom here. So in addition to the knowledge base, we also do have a YouTube channel and a Twitter channel. So those are also really handy ways to reach out. And lastly, for the Cochrane community, we do have regular author webinars that we run. So our last one in this last series that we just organized was last week, and those are usually run about every 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. So given that it is, we are going into Northern Hemisphere summer, and quite a lot of unis are on leave, we'll probably be restarting those in September, but there will probably be one in August as well. Okay, so I'll open it up to general questions now.
Yeah, hi Annalise, it's Elvis here. Yeah.
Hi.
Can you get me? Yeah, it's Elvis here. Elvis, so actually this is actually amazing, you know. I've never used it before, but it's very captivating seeing that it has actually boiled down the process of the systematic review to a digital system of just a few steps and get your whole extraction and export everything to RevMan or Excel. So it's really, I think it's just a compliment. Yeah, it's really exciting.
Oh, that's really kind. That's wonderful to hear, and I'll certainly pass that along to the developers and to the designers. They always really appreciate hearing that. So thank you very much.
It's okay, Annalise. Sure. Yeah.
Annalise, I've got a question about the Prisma. If you are struggling to get some trial registry search results into Covidence, and you are screening those separate from Covidence, is there a way that you can add them here to the Prisma? Or would you rather have to export only the text here from the Prisma and Covidence and then build your own flowchart, or use the Prisma one in a Word document, for example?
Yeah, I would say that is somewhat up to you what you would prefer to do. In order for something to be included in this Prisma, the citation does need to exist in Covidence. So in that case, I suppose it depends where you're getting the trials and the protocols from. But you could either, you could manually create a citation file and then import it so that it would be listed here. Or you could also definitely do it the way you described and editing the Prisma flowchart outside of Covidence.
Sorry, you said manually import the citation file. What do you mean by that?
I meant to manually create the citation. So this question we've gotten a lot is that essentially, if I'm understanding correctly, a lot of these protocols will come to teams really just as information that they receive, not from a database, right? So that citation wouldn't exist in an XML or in an RIS format the way it would if you had exported it from a database. So if you're in, say, EndNote, there is a way to manually create that reference, and then you could export from EndNote into an XML file or an RIS file.
Okay, so one person needs to put an EndNote to still get that XML file. You can't add manually and type into Covidence under the screening the titles and abstracts another reference.
That's correct. Yeah, you would need to create the citation in a reference manager. It doesn't have to be EndNote, but you do need to create that citation file using a reference manager.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Annalise? If not, Annalise, I think you are done.
Wonderful. Yeah. I guess I'll wrap up by saying just thank you guys so much for making the time to join us this morning. And it is really, really helpful to hear the questions that tend to come up, and so that we can get an idea of what parts of the tool are more intuitive than others so that we can improve. So thank you so much. And I really look forward to coming to Cape Town in September and hopefully meeting a lot of you in person.
Yes, thank you. I hear we are having 2 workshops on Covidence at the Global Evidence Summit. So we're looking forward to that. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this presentation for us. It has been really helpful. Yeah, and we'll see you in September.
Sounds good. And in the meantime, certainly, if you do need any help, I'll just sort of remind everyone that